Alright, so for the last and final Python script or data set, we are going to look at retrieving all of the players who have played from 2010 to the current year. And then the information we are retrieving is just going to be basic things like the position they put, the position they play, the team they play for, if they play for any team, also their weight, how tall they are, and a couple other things as well. So, of course, let's take a look at the website we are going to begin with. And it comes to no surprise that we are going with Pro Football Reference. It was the best option to look at which players have played from the period we want to look at. And the thing about this website, it wasn't too hard to scrape, and it was an interesting task or interesting script to create as well. So this is the website, and as you can see, we need to go through all of the players that have played from 2010 all the way up to 2020. And how they have their website set up is that when you come to the list of players, they have alphabets that are corresponding to the player names, like the player last name, excuse me. So you can see Joe Abbey, his last name starts with an A, so he is listed under A. And then players like maybe Bernard are going to be listed under the index of B or the letter B. So we have to figure out a way on how to move between each letter. But we also have to figure out a way to determine which player has at least played in the 2010 season. If they have not played in the 2010 season, then we do not need them. And this is going to be a lot of players we have to filter out and a lot of players we have to filter in because so many players have played for the NFL. So let's go back to our script. Of course, we set up our environment, load in the packages in the libraries. We haven't really changed anything yet. So with the next line of coding, we are going to create a variable, and it's going to be a list that contains all of our alphabets. And the good thing about this Pro Football Reference website is that when you click on any letter, the only thing that changes in the link is just the letter. So we don't really have to do much here. So if we click K, K gets changed. If we click maybe Q, Q gets or that K gets changed into a Q, and we move on to the next link. So that was just my thinking. That was the easiest way of doing it. Just basically setting up a list and then having all of the alphabets in there. So once that has been completed, we then create a variable called I, which is going to be equal to 0. And then we create our data frame on the outside as usual. So now for alphabets in this letter list, we are going to create a link. And as I was mentioning earlier, we are just going to replace the ending part of the URL link. So if we're on A and then we need to move to B, this will be an A here. And then when we move to B, it'll be a B. Sorry about that. Then we are going to print the link just so that I know that it's working correctly. Then we go through of reading the web page and parsing it using HTML. So now we are going to find all of the values that have a p tag associated with them. So this represents all the players in a given letter. And then I say for athletes and players, so this represents all of the players for a given letter, and it's going to return the player full string here. So it's going to return Bernard Quarles and then quarterback 1987 to 1987. Then I say we are going to do a try and accept. Within the try, we are going to create a variable called the last year they played, or LY. And then it's going to take the last 4 characters for that player string and create it into an integer. So the last 4 characters is going to be the year that the player first played or when the player was first introduced to the league. So you can see if we're looking at 1987, we don't need this player here. But if we look at the next player for 2017, we do need him because he has played at least past 2010. And then I say if we can't retrieve the year from the player, and it's most likely due because we retrieve way more information that we need, like some other text had a p tag associated with them. So I said, okay, if we are going to return an error, that means we have looked through all of the players and we could reset I back to 0. Then I proceed to create another loop and say if the last year the player played is greater than or equal to 2010, we are going to perform these steps. So again, we create another try and accept, and then from there, we are going to get the player link. Now on this website, you can expect here, and when you expect, you can find a link to the player personal web page. So let's look at another letter, and we'll go with Jacob Lacey. So you can see here when we click on Jacob Lacey, it's going to take us to his personal web page where we could look at the position he played, how tall he is, the weight he weighed in at, and when he was born, and all other stats. So that's what we do here. We are going to retrieve the hypertext for that player, and you can see we have the beginning of the link, and this represents the ending part of the link. Once we have that, we are then going to go to that player web page, and then once we parse this web page, we are going to return the player name. And then I also have this except here because sometimes when I ran the script, we would get an error saying that it couldn't return the information. So I decided to add the same thing under the except, and it ran perfectly through. Because when we are going through so many links, there's a good chance that we are going to get a connection timeout error. So in that case, if the web page cannot be reached in the specified time, I threw this except in here so that it'll be ran again. And when we run it again, or when the except is triggered the second time, it should work. So once that is done, we are going to retrieve the player position, the player weight, and the player height. Then of course we have another try and accept here with the weight and the height. And then we also perform some data manipulation with the position text. And I do want to mention that this website is, for the most part, it is static, meaning that every player is going to have the same amount of information listed here. So like the player name appear once, and then it appears again, and then the position, then the weight, and then the height, and then the weight. But in some cases, we will only get the player name to appear once. We probably wouldn't get a position to show up, or their weight and their height. And so this is why we have that try and accept here as well, because if we cannot retrieve that, then we really have no other way of getting that information unless we go to another website. But it's not really necessary to do that because it's such a small sample size of players that do not have a height and a weight. Next, we retrieve the birth date, and we create a variable called team text. It's going to begin as an empty string, and then if the player is currently playing for a team, we are going to list that team name there. And then we are going to retrieve the college they play for as well, if they played for a college. And then you can see I had to put in another if statement because, as I was saying earlier, some of the information may be thrown off. So like the position of the college text, instead of being at 5, now it's at 4. So it's something to take into consideration. Then we are also going to try and retrieve the player picture if they have one associated with them. I should also explain that if the team text is greater than or equal to A, meaning that the player is at least on the current team, Then the college for the player will be at the index of 5. And if they are not on a current team, the college for the player will be at an index of 4. Hopefully that makes a little bit of sense. Because if you take a look at Jacob Lacey here, he doesn't play for an NFL team. But if he did, there would be a row inserted somewhere around here where it'll list maybe the Baltimore Ravens or the Miami Dolphins or Cincinnati Bengals. So now we have to account for that because now the position of the college text has now moved down 1. So with that out of the way, we of course are going to create a staging data frame, create our columns, and then assign those columns the values that we created with the variables earlier. Then of course we are going to do a try except pass on the player picture link. Not every player is going to have a picture, so that is why we have this try except pass here. And then we have the player link. Every player should have a player link. Then once that is done, we are going to append it to the outside of our data frame. And then for the position column, we are going to do a string replace where we have a colon. We are going to replace it with a empty string. Then we are going to basically reset these variables back to an empty string. And then lastly, print out the position of I, or what number I is on, and then the player name, and then the player link. So you can see from our print statement that we have started off at A, and the first player, I'm not too sure how to pronounce his name, but Isako Atui, hopefully I pronounced that correctly, has at least played in the 2010 NFL season or greater than that. And we could double check that now. So yes, you can see that he played in the 2013 season. And if you look at I is on 1. And the next player that appears has the position of I at 5, Jared Abbrederis, excuse me. So now the next players that we look at, if the script is performing correctly, they should not be in our list, or the years they played, the earliest year they played should be less than 2010. So you can see Joey Abe, 1948, so that's correct. Faye Abbott, 1921. Vince Abbott, 1987. And then finally, Jared Abbrederis, 2015. So that is correct. So the script works correct here, and it's going to only retrieve the players that have at least played in the year of 2010. And like I said, this is a pretty long script because it has to go through all of the players, determine whether the player has played at least in the year of 2010 or greater, and then it has to go to that specific player link and then retrieve all of that information. And we're dealing with thousands of players here, and this is over an internet connection, so it's not like we're reading in a CSV file and the information is automatically there. We have to go in and go through each and every player on that Pro Football Reference website, and you can see that just scrolling down how many players there are. So we are still scrolling, and there are so many players that have played at least in the year of 2010 or greater. And if we scroll all the way down to the bottom, there's some more steps that I performed. But let's take a look at the data frame right now. So you can see we have the player, the position, the height, the date they were born on, the college, the current team if they played on the team, the player picture, and the player link. Then when I exported the file, there were some things that were incorrect, like on the Pro Football Reference website, they had some guys, when you looked at their player link, they had them listed as QB in the position, QB throws right, wide receiver throws right. So basically I had to go and change all of that just so that it looks a lot more cleaner. Now, this is a step that is optional, but for the sake of like just visually looking at it, I think it was just best to go with changing the values. And it did take some time because I had to go in and look at which players were assigned incorrect positions, not because of the script, but because of how Pro Football Reference set up their site. Like they have this QB throws right. It's not necessarily wrong, but we want the clean position like quarterback, wide receiver, cornerback, linebacker. We don't need to know if the quarterback throws right or left or their weight. Like I was saying, if some information is missing from the player name, then we get other information thrown in at wrong areas. But it was a very small sample size, and it didn't take a lot to fix. And then we also had some changes to do to the college column, and we took care of that as well. And whenever a date occurred or we had this string here, I just basically put no college. And just to make sure everything is clean, I decided to strip all lead in and trail in spaces from each and every column, except for the links to the picture or the player. And then the final data frame is exported to a CSV file, and we could actually take a look at this data frame and see how many players are in there. Alright, so the data set has loaded up, or the file has loaded in. And I'm just going to expand a couple columns. I don't want to expand these two columns here because it's just going to expand all across the screen. And let's look at the players. So you can see we have 6,432 players in this list. And it's not 33 because it's taken into account this column header here. So that's a lot of players that played from the year 2010 to 2021. And keep in mind that the Pro Football Reference page did not include new rookies, but I did create a script for that. So we have this script here called Pro Football Reference Players, New Players Final. And it's basically going to be the same script, but when the NFL season starts and the rookies get some games under their belt, this script will run most likely weekly. So we're gonna have the rookies in there now, and then we could join the new players into our database on the same table with all of the other players. So that's pretty much it for the scripts and data sets. And now let's take a look at the task scheduler.